there and welcome to Panic or Makes Noise. Today we're going to have a look at the brand new module by Make Noise, the Spectraphon. It is a dual spectral oscillator which uses real-time spectral analysis and resynthesis to create new sounds from those that we feed into it. I'll give you an overview of how it works first and then we'll patch it from scratch together. So, let's dive in. The Spectraphon has two almost identical sides A and B, which you can use independently, and they both can operate in two different modes. When the button is not lit up, you are in spectral amplitude modulation mode, or SAM, and when the button is lit up, you are in spectral array oscillation mode, or SAO. But let's stop here for a minute and quickly get into what spectra actually are. According to the Fourier theorem, any musical tone, every sound is composed of a mix of sine waves, which all have a distinct frequency, amplitude, and phase. Through Fourier analysis or spectral analysis, you can take any sound and break it down into its single components to see which sine waves it is actually made of. The sum of those sine waves that form a complex sound or wave is called a spectrum. And in this spectrum of any musical sound, there is always a sine wave that is called fundamental, which is also the perceived pitch that you are hearing, plus a set of corresponding sine waves that are called harmonics, which determine the tone quality or timbre of the instrument. But what exactly is a spectral oscillator now? Let's have a closer look at the two modes each side of the Spectraphon can operate in. In SAM, or spectral amplitude modulation mode, the Spectraphon analyzes the spectrum of any incoming audio signal that you can plug in up here in real time and then generates a collection of sine waves according to the spectrum of the sound source and those two knobs over here called slide and focus. Let's try it out by plugging in the XPO audio signal into the Spectraphon and see what happens. The sum of the generated sine waves can be heard at the odd and even harmonics outputs up here, which I'll just quickly patch into my mixer module so we can listen to it. You can set the modulation depth of the incoming audio signal with the input attenuator over here. The Spectraphon now analyzes the spectral information of the audio signal from the XPO and then applies it to side A of the Spectraphon where I plugged in the audio signal. As you can see, it has no effect on the perceived pitch of the odd and even harmonics outputs, whether I turn the frequency knob on the XPO or not, as it is only taking the spectral information of the signal into account and not the pitch information of the plugged-in signal. So now you're basically hearing the characteristics of the XPO sound, the timbre so to say, while the pitch is being controlled by the Spectraphon. Here we can adjust the frequency and fine-tune it, or play melodies by sending in a CV via this 1 volt per octave jack. These three knobs are also identical on every side and affect what is output at the odd and even harmonics outputs up here. With the slide knob, you can set which frequency from the incoming audio signal will be interpreted as the fundamental, also called the first harmonic, while all other harmonics of our new spectrum appear as multiples of this frequency. focus then sets the width or sensitivity of each band of harmonics, meaning how close to a given harmonic the input must get in order for the harmonic to be activated. At low values, smaller ranges of frequencies will be heard and the individual harmonics will be more pronounced. At higher values, more harmonics will be heard and they will ring longer after changes in the sound source or when we change the slide parameter. The third knob is called partials and it sets the relative loudness of the upper and lower harmonics at the odd and even outputs. When turning the knob from left to right, it starts with silence at fully counterclockwise, then adding lower harmonics at a low volume, and then adding more and more harmonics, and finally generating all harmonics at full amplitude according to the current spectrum at fully clockwise. With these 3 knobs alone, we already have so many possibilities to sculpt the sound, it's pretty amazing. There are 2 more outputs on each side of the spectrophone, namely a sine oscillator and a sub-oscillator output. Both outputs will always follow the main pitch of the according side A or side B of the spectrophone. But it's important to know that the sub-oscillator output is only active in SAO mode. In SAM mode, it's actually an envelope follower of the input signal up here that you can use to modulate whatever parameter you have in mind. Or you can switch it to CV mode to also modulate other parameters with it by pressing Shift and CV. So in SAM mode you have an audio input signal that is being analyzed constantly and the resulting spectrum at the odd and even outputs changes accordingly. If you want, you can use this spectrum, or better said a series of these spectra, to create a so-called array. You can then use this array to further explore it in SAO mode. I'll show you what I mean. For best results, you should turn partials fully clockwise, take a sound that is constantly changing, and then hold Shift and press Array. That's already it. The Spectraphone just wrote 1024 spectra into the array in over a second. You could also send in a clock signal over here, so the Spectraphone then writes a single spectrum into the array every time a clock signal is received at the input. If you want to stop array creation, you can just press Shift and Array again, otherwise it will stop when it has created all 1024 spectra. When you now switch to a spectral array oscillation mode by pressing this button here, you can then use the sequence of spectra to explore it further. The spectra of the currently selected array will automatically be mapped to the slide and focus controls, so you can edit the sound to your liking or modulate it. In this mode, the Spectraphone operates a little more like an analog VCO. It oscillates at all times, with the spectrum at the odd and even harmonic outputs being shaped by the stored spectra of the array that we created in SAM mode. In this mode, the slide and focus knobs control which spectrum of the array will be used to shape the harmonics at the odd and even output jacks. With slide, you can browse through the whole range of all spectra of our selected array, while focus is a more fine selection tool in this mode. All in all, you can store up to 16 arrays per side. You can select them by holding Shift on the according side and then press Shift on the opposing side. The array binary shows which array you currently selected using the colored LEDs. In this mode, the input jack can be used to detune the even output, by the way, either for slight detuning or for a harmonic interval, for example. And the clock input can be used to gradually step through the single spectra with each clock pulse, instead of writing new spectra like in SAM mode. And last but not least, we can use the sub-oscillator outputs in this mode. On side A it outputs a sub-sawtooth, and on side B a saturated sub-sine. In the middle of the module we finally have an FM bus, with which we can frequency modulate both sides of the spectrophone. With those two index knobs we can set the depth of the internal frequency modulation to the respective side. This follow button over here is very handy when using the FM bus. When the button is lit, then side B is in follow mode. This way side B can be pitch sequenced by side A, meaning side B will simply follow along to the pitch of side A, so to speak. When the button is flashing, then side B is being hard synced to side A, meaning that the frequency knob on side B doesn't have an effect on the pitch anymore, but you can change the timbre in interesting ways with it now. Now let's finally make some music with it. For this patch I used the Hermod by Squab instruments to program some sequences for the Spectraphone, and I'm also using it as the main clock generator. The main clock is being output over here at gate 8, and first I'll patch it into my multiple so I can spread the clock later on in my system. I programmed a melody on track 1 for side E of the Spectraphone, and I will patch it now into the 1 volt per octave input over here. I programmed 2 other melodies on track 2 and track 3 for side B of the Spectraphone, and I'll patch first track 2 into the 1 volt per octave input over here. In the next step I would like to patch the main outputs of side A and side B into my Doepfer VCA over here. So I'll take this odd and even output of side A and patch it into the audio input of my Doepfer VCA. And I'll do the same with side B over here. From the output from the Doepfer VCA, I will patch the signal of side A into the mimeophone. And from there I'll patch it into my mixer module over here. For the VCA to open up I will need a CV signal, and I will take the main clock that I patched in here and patch it into my envelope generator first, over here. And from there I'll take the envelope and patch it into the CV in of the Doepfer VCA. When I press play now on my sequencer, you can see that it receives the trigger signal. I will use side A in SAM mode, so spectral amplitude modulation mode, and for this we will need to patch in an audio signal for it to work. I will take the triangle out of the XPO over here, but I'll patch it first into my dual low pass gate, and from there we can patch it into the audio input of the Spectraphone. The dual low pass gate will need a trigger signal to open up, and I will take the gate signal from track 1 on my sequencer. Let's see if we can hear anything already. Let's mix in the mimeophone now. So many sweet spots. In this patch I am using the sub-CV output in CV mode to modulate the frequency of the XPO over here. Let's get to side B now. We already patched the main outputs into the Doepfer VCA over here. And from there we will patch the audio outputs into the Milky Way by endorphins for a little bit of reverb. And from there we will patch it into the mixer module. The Doepfer VCA will also need a CV signal to open up. And for this we will take the gate output from track 2 over here and patch it into the trigger input of the Quadra envelope generator. And then we will use those two envelopes to open up the CVs over here. I'm using side B in SAO mode, so spectral array oscillation mode. So for this one I won't need an input signal for it to work. With focus and slide we now can select a spectrum from the array that we stored. Let's mix in the Milky Way now. Over here we can now play also with the envelopes. From side A, I would also like to use the sine wave output, and for this I will patch it into my dual low pass gate. And I will take the output from the dual low pass gate and patch it into my mixer. As usual, we will also need a CV signal for it to open up. And I will take the gate output from track 1 on my sequencer. This way we have a nice sine wave that has the same frequency as the main outputs from side A. I would also like to use the sub-oscillator output from side B over here. And I'll patch it as well into my dual low-pass gate. And from there I will send it into my distortion module and then into my mixer again. For the CV input I will take the gate output from track 2 over here, which I patched into the envelope generator. I can stack my cable on top of it and then patch it into the CV in. would also like to use the sine wave output from side B over here. And I will patch it over here into my dual low pass gate. And I will take the output and patch it into my mixer. As for the trigger signal, I will take a copy of the main clock signal, which I patch into the multiple, and then patch it back here into the CV in. And last but not least, I would like to incorporate this Time Safari module into the patch. For this, I will take a copy of the left output of the Milky Way over here. And patch it into the audio input. And then patch the output back into my mixer. It's a very noisy signal, but combined with the rest of the signals, it's a very nice addition. Alright, let's jam now a bit with this patch.